From 30,000 feet, you can see the horizon, and from the cloud, the future comes into focus. And before you choose and integrate your ERP cloud applications, we are there. Cloud Services Solutions, your industry partner in putting all elements of your global business into one perfect ecosystem. Cloud Services Solutions untangles the ERP cloud for you, strategically employing Magic Quadrant research with our own client assessment matrix, streamlining all your applications. And we help you create predictable costs, reduce risk, and enhance productivity in pursuit of company expansions, mergers, and acquisitions. Cloud Services Solutions helps you scale up, control systems, contain costs, and ensure data security throughout your digital transformation. Industry media call Cloud Services Solutions a top cloud solution provider with an exceptional repertoire of successful acquisitions. And a global Fortune 500 client says Cloud Services Solutions reduced an 18-month project to 9 months, saved $8 million, and gave us real-time access to reports that used to take weeks. Cloud Services Solutions, veteran, tested, trusted client advocate, your insurance policy for boardroom and shareholder peace of mind. From ground level, it's tough to see past the obstacles. At 30,000 feet, the view from Cloud Services Solutions is clear.
Hello and welcome back to the Argyle CIO Leadership Forum Vision Strategy Trends. My name is Vicki Lynn Brunskill with Argyle. Just a couple of notes to go over before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker for this session. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience today. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, and those booths do include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout this session, please simply type into the Q&A chat. We will address your questions at the end of the session. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Stephen Roche, Chief Executive Officer, Cloud Services Solutions. We are so excited to have Stephen with us for his thought leadership presentation titled Digital Transformation for the ERP Space for the Next 5 Years. Welcome, Stephen. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate the opportunity for you folks for us to speak to you today in regards to our services, as well as the digital transformation for your ERP space for the next 5 years. Apologize for being the last speaker, but hopefully I keep you folks entertained for the next half an hour. So we're going to go over a quick agenda. We're going to ask you a couple of poll questions. There's a bonus poll question that's not in here that I'll ask the individuals. Give you a quick overview of who our company is. Then we'll go in regards to the digital journey, how to improve your automation and your planning for the next 5 years, as well as helping choose vendors and partners. And then we'll go into the poll question responses, as well as the questions. So with that, quick questions for the group. Again, you can respond throughout the sessions as well as ask questions. The first question we have for you: was your project on time? The last project you did in the ERP space. It's always an interesting question to ask individuals, as well as was your project on budget? As well as, did your team have consistency throughout the entire project, not just for the start of it? And then, was your project scoped accurately? Now, the bonus question or the poll question that's not here is, who's going to win the World Series this year? Is it going to be the Philadelphia Phillies or the Houston Astros? So with that, we'll get started. Again, I'm trying to lighten up the conversation because obviously I'm the last individual for today. So let's go in. I'll give you a little bit about my background. I've been doing this, since the Phillies won the last World Series in 2008. Just kidding. It was a few years ago. I've been doing this over 20 years. And our organization's been around for almost over a decade now. And what we do is we help organizations help and select their process with respect to enterprise resource planning, software, HR, financials, etc. And what we do is we come in as the trusted advisor and act as the client advocate for the companies. A little bit about what we do from an ERP standpoint as far as the cloud. As I mentioned before, we do global advisory services. We have offices throughout the world. We are specific to the ERP softwares because obviously IT consulting runs the gamut of different types of applications. We also help organizations control their costs for these systems. I'm sure everybody that's on this call today is well aware of how expensive these things are. And of course, you can't turn them in and out within a couple of months or days. These are long-term investments for organizations. So we want to make sure that you select the right software packages for your organizations, hence the reason why we offer these services. And then we also help with the implementation and upgrade services as well with respect to the financials and human capital management. A little bit about where we're located. We have 3 offices in the United States. Our corporate office for the US is in Wilmington, Delaware. Our European office is in London. We have 2 offices now in Asia, Singapore and Malaysia. We're going to be opening up a 3rd office in Asia at the beginning of next year. Right now, we're in Latin America and Brazil, but we're looking at opening up 2 more locations in the Latin America region as well, starting of next year. A little bit about different thought leaderships that we've done throughout the last couple of years. We did one over in Asia. We've done a few over in Europe. I travel extensively for the organization. I had just come back from a little show that they had in Paris. And now I'll be going back over to Europe later on in November for another conference for a vendor. So we were usually brought in to do presentations such as we're doing today in regards to, helping organizations kind of have a better understanding, from a third-party product agnostic company as far as for, different vendors, trends, et cetera, that are going on in the industry. And hopefully this will give you a little bit more background as far as for, different selections that you might not have thought of in the past. Here's a couple of awards that we've won over the years, top cloud, et cetera, whatnot like that. And then, here's a client that we had, we helped them with, they're growing quite substantially over last several years and are still doing acquisitions. What we did is basically took their acquisitions of all these different systems, these large ERP systems, and combined them into one, and then help them obviously reduce their time and costs from that perspective. So one of the things I really want to make sure that, I get a point across to everybody, there's a third-party organization that helps in companies when they're looking at vendor selections as far as for the review of how their projects went. And again, this is an independent third party. And what was kind of interesting is this snapshot was taken as of last year. The unfortunate part is the numbers have gone down since then, not up. And I'll explain the reasons why. The overall project satisfaction has changed from 21 to 22 because obviously there's certain factors that we'll discuss in this presentation today. But what I also wanted to do is make sure that you understand that you might have the best intentions and so forth. Project team consistency, the scoping you think is correct, and things can change on you, in a moment. And if you're not prepared for those particular changes, obviously it could drive up costs for your implementation, et cetera, as far as for third parties. So, we just want to make sure that you're, aware of these situations. And again, obviously every software vendor out there would love to say that it's 99%. The challenging part is most of the software salespeople have never done an implementation. Hence the reason why they're great at selling the software, not necessarily great as far as for implementing it. Hence the reason why, there's third parties, advisory services like ours to help with the vendor selection and give you a realistic analysis as far as for your budgets, as well as your project plans as well. So, everybody's talking about this digital journey, transformations, etc. So one of the things you want to make sure moving forward, obviously, hopefully everybody, executive level here is familiar with these things, but we just want to make sure, we bring this back to your attention, because a lot of times, you get involved with these projects, you kick them off with the other executives, and then you're making assumptions that these other groups are doing fantastic and they don't necessarily need your assistance. But the key thing is, what we always look at when we're taking on new customers and doing some advisory is the harmonization. How can you bring your systems together in a more smooth transitional process so that you can hopefully be able to get a return on your investment. A lot of people, I'm sure there's many folks on this call right now that have disparate systems and so forth like that. Is this the time to be able to replace them in this bigger project, or are there abilities to take a look at different applications that could replace these disparate systems? Again, what we try to work with the organizations is to condense the amount of different systems they have. Hence the reason why I know everything is going to the quote unquote cloud, but you still have to connect all your third-party systems to the cloud. You still have to have the vendor relationships, all that kind of stuff. So the more you can centralize, the better off you are, as well as the KPIs. You want to make sure that you're getting the right information and the right results, no matter what type of software application that you would purchase. The next thing is, what about your digital dexterity looks like today and how to improve it. So obviously, like I had mentioned on the earlier slide, there's a big changes going on. I've seen in the industry. As I said, I've been doing this for over 20 some years. I know it doesn't look like that, but I have a few gray hairs because of it. But the biggest challenge that we've never seen in this industry is not only the internal staffing, but also the external staffing too, with the implementation partners. Literally, people have been transitioning out. The typical 2-week notices has now gone away. Unfortunately, you're hearing about these quiet quitting, et cetera, like that. So it's very important, especially if you're going to take on these multi-million-dollar projects, is to make sure there's incentives for your internal staff to make sure that they stay with you throughout the project. Also, what we've noticed is the suggestions we always give is, if you're doing one of these major digital transformation shifts, is make sure you have senior individuals assigned to the project. We've seen over the years where organizations will go ahead and backfill the individuals with junior people. They might have a certification, but they don't know your organizational history, et cetera, third parties. And that's where we run into, we see a lot of issues, as far as for those individuals that are communicating. Clearly, you want to make sure that you have, the senior management, your steerco committee, involved, engaged, making sure they're communicating. Obviously, change management is huge, both for your internal customers as well as your external customers. And then we get into the external staffing. Always an interesting can of worms, no matter how or what applications that you would choose. The best question that we would get is, and what we'll do is, one of the things what we'll do at the end is we're going to go over the poll answers, and then we're going to answer the questions at that time. So maybe one of the slides coming up might answer one of your questions, but we will definitely make sure that I leave time to answer any of the questions. So with respect to like implementation partners, timing is key to a lot of these agreements that are signed with organizations. Q1, very, very strong time of the year where you can get what we refer to as the A team. Some organizations, if they wait to the third quarter, again, it all depends, where you are located throughout the globe, where you're going to kick it off. Is, you can have a great team, or you can wind up with whatever who's left on the bench. And that's what we always make sure that we advise customers to make sure that they choose the right implementation partner. One of the interesting key things that we've noticed over the years is, obviously, the software vendor is going to sell you the software. We've also started to notice that they try to engage also with the implementation partner and make recommendations. we always think that, it all depends who the sales individual is for that company. We decide to, we always suggest to the customers to look on your own as far as for who the certified implementation partners are and do your due diligence, your RFPs, et cetera. Also, what you want to make sure of is the third-party providers. Make sure you communicate out to them as far as for your timelines, any type of slippage. Obviously, being in this, for an example, the HR, your benefits rollouts are always at the end of the year in the United States. You don't want to, change your plans with a benefit provider at the last second, because again, they have to, work with their providers. Same thing with payroll, as an example. You always want to go on a quarterly basis, half year or year end. Year end is usually the cleanest, in which to be able to move to a new system. But again, these are things that you think of over the years of doing this, and the staffing is always a challenge, and particularly now with the resources. And again, this is some of the challenges that we've found over, I would say, the last year or so. Typically the projects that we were working on before, 6 to 9 months. Now the projects are going a year and a half, 2 years, and it has nothing to do with the customer. It has to do with the ability to supply resources for the particular project. So it's always making sure, you include the stakeholders, like I mentioned before. Make sure you review the scope of work and project plan on a monthly basis. Again, because of the resourcing challenges that companies are facing, both small as well as large, they're facing the same situation. And unfortunately, it's not industry agnostic either. It's hitting every industry. So you just have to plan for that and make sure that you're aware of it. Also, what we also suggest to companies is reevaluate your partner agreement if the turnover becomes over 40%. And you say, well, that's almost impossible. I've never seen that before. That's not necessarily true, especially with the larger organizations that companies bring in. Sometimes there's really starting to see a churn. You also want to make sure that you really reinforce with the implementation partners to make sure that they're working in your time zone. That's another critical factor that we've seen as far as for scope creep and whatnot, bringing offshore versus onshore. Again, it depends where you're rolling out the particular project. You want to make sure there's consistency. That's the biggest thing throughout the project. Everybody's communicating, everything is on time. If there's a slippage, and it happens, you make sure that you communicate it and make the adjustments ahead of time. The other key thing is about change management. You always want to make sure that you have a great change management team with you. You can outsource that as well, but again, you want to make sure that you have individuals in there. So quickly going through the planning of the digital transformation for the next 5 years. Big difference between the big bang versus regional projects. Which one's more successful? If you can afford it, it's better to do a big bang than regional. We've been involved over the last several years with a lot of the regional projects versus the big bangs. So, that's always a challenge for us. If you can, it's great to knock it out all at once because of the repetitiveness that you have to go through when you do regional rollouts. Start planning at least 6 months out ahead of time for the project. Look beyond today. And again, as the title of the presentation, look out for 5 years. I know we're all in the technology field, and we all know that every 6 months, it literally looks like it's changing constantly. So you want to focus on something not for now, but what is your organization? What are your goals over the next 5 years? Make sure that you send out the RFPs at least 5 months prior to your start. And also, really very important is to verify your implementation staff. That's really critical. So what I wanted to do is just leave some time. I think we have some wonderful people on the call today with the, I'll go over to poll questions if I can get back up there. So let's do the first question. Was your project on time? 60% say yes, 40% say no. And then we have for the project budget, 80% say yes, 20% say no. Did your team have consistency? And then we're down to, sorry about that, 60% there. Again, I think it goes back to it has no fault of any organization itself. It's just the staffing is a real challenge in the industry right now. And I apologize. I'm trying to get down to the last question about, oh, one, I thought I saw it. If I can get some help from the folks online, what was the most exciting question as far as for the poll of who do you think the winners of the World Series is? And I apologize, I can't, for whatever reason, my my chat is not working.
33% say Astros and 67% say Phillies. Your
Very
people.
good. That's an excellent response. It's just it's amazing just to see them. I have a running joke with a former client of ours that's based in Houston, very large organization. And I said, you have to let other organizations win once in a while. We can't afford to win it every year. So how about one year you just give it to us? So hopefully that's the way in which it goes. So what I wanted to do is go over real quick. We have about what, 5.5 minutes. And I wanted to go over the questions. So the first question that came in is, what is your biggest pain point when coming in as an implementation partner? The biggest pain point is really making sure that there's a synergy between not only the implementation partner, but who's going to be working on the project. I always say, send an email once. Don't do anything through Slack or Snapchat or whatever people use these days. If there's a misunderstanding, it's better to get on a conference call or get them on the phone immediately. You don't want to wait for certain things to occur. And again, a lot of times emails, chats, and so forth can be misread, especially since, at the executive levels, you're always working on other projects at the same time, and it can be misconstrued. So that's the biggest challenge, I think, as far as for an implementation partner. And plus, the implementation partner doesn't really want to admit that they could have some turnover. Hence the reason why we really make sure that we're always updating our customers, saying, okay, this is the trend. Here's what we're seeing as far as for turnover, et cetera. The second question that came in, how do you address stakeholder concerns on cloud security? That's a great question. We have a lot of international customers. Always a big challenge when we're doing projects in the EU, as far as for data security. What we found is, obviously, all these larger applications out there, they have the data security. But one of the interesting challenges that I've seen is, it goes back to where your corporate headquarters is located. If it's in the United States, servers sit in the United States. They don't have to sit in Europe. But if the headquarters is in Europe, then the servers have to now be in Europe. Same thing if they're in Asia. They're just those type of requirements nowadays. And companies are really starting to push back on it. But as far as for cloud security, it's definitely gotten better over the years. Banks are now starting to look into the cloud applications and so forth, as well as governments, which was always a challenge because, of their security policies and whatnot. Also, when you're dealing with governments don't want any of that data housed outside their country. So you're seeing a lot of cloud servers and so forth going up in particular countries to be able to host these particular applications as well. The third question that came in, this is great questions. ERP optimization is not new. How has the ERP landscape changed in the past year or so? Well, that's a great question. It's really has changed in as far as for the talent model. It's not the actual optimization itself, but the skill sets. Again, being in this business as long as I have, it's been really interesting in not only optimizing the applications, but you also have to remember everything's now going over to the cloud. You still have to upgrade it. You still have to update it. So you have to have a team or a good third party, at least, to help you with those updates. It all depends what applications you choose. Some could have 5 updates a year, all the way down to 2 updates a year, but you still have to have a presence in your organization to be able to deal with those updates. Some of them could be security patches and et cetera, that goes back to your cloud security. You want to make sure they're included. You also want to make sure you have a team that can read through the documentation like a month or two ahead of time. That's mostly what a lot of the software vendors will do. They'll give you a test server as an example to test everything out and make sure everything is working. The fourth question, what do you think company spend is most wasted in terms of ERP digital transformation efforts? Oh, that's a really great question. I wouldn't say necessarily a waste, but I see a lot of folks when they try to do a global rollout of payroll, it doesn't exist, and it's a shame some of the software vendors just don't admit to that. And then what you should do is really work with the vendors, not only globally but locally, that can handle those third-party integrations for payroll, because that's obviously I think is the most important part of the technology, because if you can't pay a person on time, union or non-union, people won't stay if their pay is incorrect. Question number 5, what's new in technology related to streaming and transforming in the ERP process? Wow, that's a great question. That changes almost on a daily basis. The big push that I've seen in the ERP lately, as far as for streamlining and transformation, is the LMS, learning management system. Huge. You have some really big players coming into the market, such as LinkedIn, et cetera, that are trying to make a big push in that space. The challenging part is you have to make sure that it will work with the vendor that you're working with correctly. So we have about 5 minutes to wrap up. And what we're going to do is the 7th question. This is great. This is a lot of questions. I love this. How do state and local governments compare to small private sector firms when it comes to ERP and planning for the future? That's a great question. Typically, the state and local governments, as far as compare for timing perspective, they usually take longer to do it, again, because their budgets are totally different than a private sector firm. I mean, they have to go through different agencies inside local as well as state agencies, and budgets are constantly being changed. And then, a couple of years ago, we got this thing thrown in called the COVID issue, which really rocked a lot of states, a lot of local governments, and a lot of countries as well, as far as for what their focus was on it. So there's different things that the private sector looks at versus what a state and local government looks at as far as for a comparison. Again, because of the requirements for state and local governments, they have to make sure that that particular cloud application sits in their particular country. They can't move out of the country. That's a requirement anywhere I've seen in the world. And last but not least, the 8th question is, how easy is it to migrate coming from another platform? Honestly, I had this question from a small group in Europe asked me this at our booth over there. And I said to them, and I didn't mean to be sarcastic, I said, it all depends. And what I mean by that is, how much did you customize the system that you're currently on? That's the biggest challenge. When you go over to the cloud, any third party that you go to now really wants to restrict your customizations. And the reason why is it's just easier for them to do the upgrades for the organization. So that's why when you say about migrating from one platform to another, how easy it is. It doesn't matter if you're moving over from PeopleSoft or Oracle or SAP or Workday or whatever. It depends what you did to the application, as well as the third parties. You always have to make sure that the third parties are aware of what you're trying to do, because they're essentially partners with you, and and you have to make sure that they can support the platform that you're moving to as well. And final question. We're almost up to 10 questions. That's cool. So we're at question 9. What is perspective on in-house staffing levels at ERP systems to move to the cloud? Wow, that's a great question. That's a very big challenge for a lot of customers, is the staffing situation. I've seen a lot of customers over the past several years give incentives for the individuals to stay at the organizations. I would say 5-10 years ago, when the cloud was pretty new, you would basically get through halfway through an implementation, and then your resources would start disappearing because other competitors or other people in the field would start looking at acquiring those assets, because again, there's very limited assets that are in play that know these particular ERP systems and these cloud systems. So obviously you want to make sure that you train your individuals. You want to make sure that you document the daylights out of everything. I can't stress that enough, because you never know who's going to leave and when. So I always go back to, and I hate to leave on this note, is the hit by the bus theory. You want to make sure that somebody else can come in your applications and be able to take over the next day based off of your requirements of the organization. So with that, I greatly appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you so much for staying around to the last presentation of the day. And my last shout out is go Phillies, and let's see what you guys do. Again, thank you so much, folks, for joining us today. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for that insightful presentation. Excellent. I also want to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic thought leadership. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. And this officially concludes the Argyle CIO Leadership Forum. We want to thank our sponsors, Adobe Cloud Services Solutions and Stack Overflow. Thank you again for joining us today and engaging in our content, and have a great rest of your day. And thank you again, Stephen.